This is Empire Sports Alliance, Unfiltered. No fluff, no filters, just the real side of sports. We're talking athletes, coaches, agents, doctors, executives, the people behind the scenes who actually move the needle. From building careers to surviving the grind to winning off the field. This is where real conversations collide.
Welcome to another episode of Empire Sports Alliance Unfiltered. I'm Ronnie. I'm the wealth guy. I got Jake Silva as our guest today, the owner and host of Snake Sports Talk Show. So welcome to the show, Jake.
Thank you, man. Appreciate you for taking the time and happy to be up and on here talking a little bit more about some sports and so much more.
Yeah, that's terrific. Normally we got, folks on, and I think you do too, in terms of athletes, all kinds of, like, we had a swimmer on, we had a boxer on, safeties, baseball players, etc. But now today, you're actually doing something very similar in terms of interviewing those type of folks, but all you do is talk about sports. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And, the other thing is, too, is like, when you talk about sports, it's like as a whole, right? Because sports has a way of unifying people, because at the end of the day, you kind of look at, what our politicians do every single day from both sides. And then at the same time, like the financials, the market itself, and just our everyday, 9-to-5 lifestyle, or for some, it may be a completely different lifestyle, but sports just has a way of just conversating, unifying. And at the same time, you're in the driver's seat of just being at that person's journey throughout, all the adversities, how they even got there, and then what they're currently doing now, whether they're a current athlete or they're a former athlete that now is doing outreaches, charity programs, foundations, and even some that are also in, the financial world, because they want to build financial successes for guys that really were never shown the way while even being a part of the league, and what their plans are after they leave the league.
No question about it. Again, in terms of financial security, that's a big topic for those guys. I always say, and I repeat myself, but they have a very compressed timeline in terms of like actually doing the sport, right? So they have to be proactively thinking in terms of what they're going to do next, right? Is it going to be broadcasting? What else? Is it going to be coaching, etc.? But so how did you get started in that? What's your background in terms of like how does somebody become all of a sudden basically starts their own sports talk show?
So I, growing up in Vegas for 29 years, sports has always been at the center circle of my life. I have wonderful parents that, raised me, and I didn't even have like the ordinary bedtime stories as a kid. I had a lot of sports stories. So it mostly surrounded, in baseball, because baseball was always my first love. So I got a chance to, watch a lot of, Yankee games, not to mention watching the great late Vin Scully calling games for the Dodgers. And I just absolutely loved the storytelling portions of things. But at the same time, I also had the ability to really retain a lot of information, and that was where I looked at a lot of different memories. I looked at a lot of different stat lines. Math was always my big subject growing up. But when I started to kind of put two and two together, was I couldn't even stop talking about sports. I always talked about it with my friends, my family, and really kind of doing the center like breakdown of players and organizations, and then what their future beholds in the next 3 to 5 years. And I couldn't stop talking about it. And then it came to me where I was at a time where I was pursuing criminal justice and then was pursuing for policing at the time. Okay. And this was at a time in which we were in a dark year where October 1st had occurred in Las Vegas in 2017, and they were rolling out 700 officers all on the ground. So it influenced me to do that. I went and got my associate's degree, wanted to get my foot in the door, and I eventually wanted to be a detective at the time, mostly in homicide, because I loved cracking cases, ID channel and such. So what kind of changed my profession from there was just, one, I never wanted to get sworn in, and then all of a sudden my personality mindset now changes because, one, I'm backing the badge. Two, I have a representation of myself that is both professional and at the same time respectful from all communities, and not to mention just all around in the Vegas Valley. So to me, I felt like it was kind of too much of a scare for my family. So I decided to let go of that. And then when I found out about sports, I was like, you know what? For the voice and the information retention that I have, why not put together an actual sports podcast itself. I actually started back in 2018, 2019 as an IG page. And what I did was I took pictures of, the players of news coverages. My very first one was the 9-year contract extension from Nolan Arenado with the Colorado Rockies. And
Oh, yeah.
once I started that, I started getting a lot of comments and conversations. And it grew to the point where I now was a part of the industry and the actual community itself, to where I started getting, interviews, doing IG lives with other people. Then by the time we got close to 2020, I started doing audio podcasts through Podbean. Once I started doing that, I think it was like 15 episodes in, until I then came across a late great friend of mine who was running a network himself and introduced me to StreamYard, which I never really knew a lot about, the video portions of things,
Hmm.
because one, you got to have a video camera, you got to have this and that. So once I got introduced to that, it took off from there. The show started to evolve. And then, not to mention, being recruited onto a network for the first time ever, and to where I was now broadcasting my show. I was gaining subscribers, I was gaining followers, and was kind of putting together an entire platform, which was very balanced, unbiased, but also fun in the conversation as entertainment goes. So by that point, I mean, yeah, COVID sucked because the fact of there wasn't really anything to really talk about and do, but
Yeah.
to spend that amount of time while expressing still of like sports stories, documentaries like The Last Dance that came out, which was a
Yeah.
big hit.
Yeah. It
It
was.
was we kind of rode the waves up from there. And then you fast forward, 6 years and plus to now. I mean, we've grown an immense amount of community. We've now started to get a lot of clips to where there's still more of the conversation. And it's also led me to the point where I've opened the doors to where I've had great connections with journalists, beat writers, content creators of specific teams, to where it eventually opened the door for current former athletes and coaches and so
Yeah.
much more in every single major sport, to where it's now become such a beloved, up and coming rising household name that eventually, I want to be able to grow it farther than a lot of these individual podcasts these
Yeah. I
days.
mean, you started this entirely from scratch, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So, and in terms of like, again, building that credibility, building that audience, again, you just kind of utilized COVID and, again, you said you used social media, mostly Instagram, in terms of growing the audience.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, you also think about this, like, I didn't even have a minor degree in media and in broadcasting in itself. This was all just something that was just
Passion, huh?
more, yeah, it was more passionate and more homegrown for me. Now, it did spark up, do I want to go back to school to get more of the media certs to get me further
Yep.
in from where a lot of these journalists and writers also get themselves into? Sure. But I mean, the greatest accomplishment that I've ever had in my life, with not even requiring a degree and such, was during the Super Bowl 56 media day. We had gotten a friend of ours who is also kind of close in the same field as I am in government work, to where she was able to submit an application. We got accepted out of the many rare occasions of networks that do,
Sure.
amongst ESPN and Fox Sports and all of them, to where we were on Zoom calls with a lot of people. So we had gotten guys like Johnny Hecker. I had actually had the pleasure of interviewing Zach Taylor of the Bengals, and then also Van Jefferson of the Rams. And
Yep.
that was just a surreal moment in itself. And it was an opportunity that once in a lifetime. And since then, I mean, NFL's kind of cracked down a little more of just their creditable,
Yeah.
media circles.
A
And that's where it was
little
kind
bit
of
more
tough for us.
corporate in terms of getting access to those folks. Huh?
Absolutely. Yeah. But I
Mhm.
enjoyed every moment of it. That's where I was going to make the most of that time. And it was great conversations. It was amazing, because I got to learn about Cooper Cup's leadership. I got a chance to learn about Bengals history, and then coming back into the Super Bowl for the first time in a long, long
A long
time, since
time.
the
Yeah.
80s. Yeah.
Yeah. That Collinsworth was on that team, right? When they made the Super Bowl, right?
Chris Collinsworth,
Yeah.
Kenny
Yeah.
Anderson, and like, yeah.
That's funny because I mean, there's always a split. I think opinions about Collinsworth on was it Sunday Night Football?
Yep. Sunday
I
Night
think you can
Football.
love him
Now
or hate
his
him, but
son is a part of the analyst circle now.
yep, yeah, he is. Yeah, it's funny how that happens, But I think people forget in terms of he was a pretty good receiver when he played for the
Yeah.
Bengals, right? So
Yeah, he was actually a really good receiver. He contributed a lot for the Bengals organization, and then just to be able to be in the broadcast booths. I felt like, him and Al Michaels has had a great duo with him and the late John Madden, and then
Yeah,
bringing in Collinsworth
yeah.
afterward when he retired. Like, it was, it still is entertaining. Now you got Mike Tirico, who really has stepped up in a big way to where now Sunday Night Football is still, the buzz of the talk and such a fun time to watch primetime.
I mean, Tariq's great, right? He covers a lot of different sports. He has a really broad knowledge in terms of like, I think it's pretty much covered every sport I've ever watched.
Exactly.
So, but in terms of like, how difficult do you find, you just mentioned the NFL in terms of
Mhm.
obviously they're kind of cracking down, they're a little bit more corporate and, and all that stuff. In terms of how difficult do you find it to break into the sports media today in general? If you look at other sports like NBA, NHL, college hoops, all that stuff, baseball.
Well, it does have its challenging loopholes because I mean, when you're a part of the industry, right? To me personally, I think it's more of like a dog eat dog industry
Yeah.
because there's millions upon millions of podcasters and
Yeah.
content creators that
Yeah.
all want to make a name for themselves. And it's not that like everybody just chose to be in competition. It's when you get into the actual circle itself and it just comes because of the way the system was designed. Everybody has certain takes, everybody has certain opinions. The thing about it is that, I took a chance. I didn't, like I said, I didn't have, the media credentials to where I can say, like, oh, yeah, this is my background up from here. But I
Sure.
gave it more of just a platform to where we could literally talk about any and everything that aligns up with sports and even aligns up with life. Because at the end of the day, these athletes are human beings as well. They come out, they showcase themselves on the field, on the court, on the ice, and then afterward, they want to relax, recover, and at the same time, they're back to their everyday lives with their families, their kids, and such. And so, to me, it's like I love hearing a lot about that underdog story to where,
Yeah.
somebody may not have grown in a great background and graphic, as a kid, but then eventually made something of themselves because we're in a society to where NIL deals are starting to happen. Kids are now starting to go and take it. Where back then, it was a meal ticket for some of these athletes. It was their chance to get out of where they were in and where they're from and make something of themselves to give back to their families and to their communities. So it's a tough realm because the fact of one, you always kind of have to feel like you're on your A game with as
Yeah.
far as stats, knowledgeability, and so much more to make you well respected as, as a podcaster, as an analyst and such. And you look around like all of the major networks like Fox Sports and ESPN. I mean, I tell people all the time, ESPN is not what it used to be when I was a kid because it was more informative. It was more
Yeah.
straight to the point.
Uh-huh.
Now we have all these shows that apparently now have so many clickbait takes that I just kind of like, what are we really doing as far as sports knowledge
Just
goes?
for
Like,
people to understand, in terms of
yeah,
clickbait, right?
yeah.
Can you give me an example? Because I certainly know, again, what you mean
Mhm,
from ESPN when I grew up versus now. So, I mean, again, that the traditional, I guess, sports journalism, media, kind of
mhm.
like it seems like that changed, obviously, with social media. But when you say clickbait, can you give me an example?
Absolutely. Like I said, back then, it was very straightforward to the point and very
Uh-huh.
informative to where we got our stats. We had gotten a lot of just, player performances. Whereas clickbait in today, there's hot takes about basically saying like, Joe Burrow will never win a Super Bowl, in his career because of the fact of, oh, there's all sorts of injuries, or they come out with something wild like Fernando Mendoza will be the difference maker and win a Super Bowl before all these quarterbacks. And it's just kind of more of just uprising the
Yeah.
conversation
Yeah.
rather than what is your logical
Yeah.
explanation and context behind that? Because you're talking so solely on a rookie who hasn't even stepped on the field yet. And that's where I look at it as like the NFL's built different than college football. The
Right.
minute that you come in, the speed is faster, the
Yeah.
decision making's different. And I'm like, we can all have, and this is also too where the other quote for clickbaiting is hypotheticals. These are
Yes.
all of just things that just haven't really happened
Just
yet.
broad statements that somebody makes, right? Yeah.
Exactly, and
So,
then at the same time, they harp so solely on it, and I was just hearing something about this not too long ago. Some analysts on ESPN basically said that the NBA Finals has become a participation trophy. That got so much clicks and so much hate for that because the championship trophy is a championship trophy. You
Yeah.
worked hard for it, you earned it, and you have bragging rights because you were the best team
Yeah, I'm a
in the
Knicks fan
year.
too, so definitely disagree
Yeah.
with that one, but,
Yeah, and that's where I was just like, "What do you mean?" Like, yeah, this is the platform of the NBA where it's become more parody-like because we've had a new winner every single year in the last 8 seasons, but that
right.
doesn't that in self just disingenuates how the team was constructed, the players that they have that were impactful, that they worked hard to get into this point. Yeah, did they have a better road because Boston got eliminated by Philly? Sure. But the Knicks actually worked hard to get there because they took advantage of the moment.
Again, you got to play the game, right? In terms of like,
Yeah.
who says one is better? It's a lot of, you hear that, it's a lot about matchups too, but I think to your point in terms of clickbaiting, it's just more like, I'm a New York sports fan, so it's easy to get me worked up, right? So you see
Yeah.
something like, and that's what they're banking on, right? I mean, it's the
Mhm.
same thing, like, probably the Dodger fan, if you're like, some, team in Boston, Philadelphia, it's just
Mhm.
like, hey, let me just say something a little bit outrageous and provocative, right? On a
Yep.
channel like ESPN. And the next thing you know, it's like, no, 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 no.
Mhm.
I mean, you're going to have people that go the opposite. Now the whole dialogue starts. But again, to your point, I guess it goes a little bit away from the factual stats. We know, again, Mendoza
Exactly.
been a great quarterback in college football. We don't know anything about what is he going to do in the NFL just yet, right? So,
Right. And to
um,
me, it's like we've expressed more about how we feel towards the
versus actual
subject.
facts or rational facts.
Exactly. What
Yeah,
is
yeah.
broken down in my head? What have I analyzed? And then come with the logical opinion explanation to then give a stronger argument as to the what and the why, because that's
Right.
exactly where we're at in today's society.
That's certainly not, isolated in sports. You mentioned politics
Mhm.
initially and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
rationale is out the window in a lot of these different topics, right? It's just pure emotions. So, okay.
Exactly.
But so what do you think, on that topic, what would you think the biggest obstacle was launching your show if you had to name one?
Ooh, biggest obstacle. Well, I can I can tell you, it definitely has to deal with a lot of just the technological stuff. I mean, so for
Tell me about
it
that. Yeah,
has
yeah, yeah.
because yeah, because the one thing is right, like I so again, starting from a cell phone to a social media to where I'm going, finding pictures, posting them, to evolving to, hey, now we got StreamYard. There's these things called overlays. There's these things called thumbnails. There's these things called
Yes.
like, so I had to really dive deep. And I'm a very creative mind, right? Like I love art. I've always loved drawing. I love doing a lot of those things. So I had to tap into systems like Canva and such to really kind of piece together different pictures, how to utilize like the background settings to where I only have it isolated by the player or the team logo and such like that, to
Hmm.
where creating it to where it pops out to everybody, because that's kind of the biggest thing about YouTube with growth, is because they want something that pops the people's eyes. They draw into, okay, I'm going to join this guy's live. This looks great.
Yep.
And then that's where you start gaining a lot of the viewerships, right? Then
For
you evolve into
visualization, right? So in terms of like stuff
yeah.
people can see. Okay.
Exactly. And then at the
Hmm.
same time, like my very first microphone was a Samson microphone that was like $50 at Best Buy. It had a little tripod. I was able to put that together on a USB cord. So then evolving to now, I have the Shure MV7. It's clear, it's crisper. You can hear my voice.
Oh, I can hear
And
you.
then,
Yes.
yeah, and then have the Mayano sound card where it allows me to do sound effect edits and then at the same time controlling all of just the crisper voice to where you can hear it and not so staticky and not so much of like that overread type of like sound. So it actually now evolved to a lot of that. So I that was kind of the biggest loophole, was like, how can people hear me better? How can people actually search my content without it just being a scroll and then they're like, yeah, yeah. So I got to find a way to really like boost up my art game in order for
Yep.
me to
Yep.
bring that out there. Then at the same time with the overlays, it's topics to talk about. What exactly is he talking about? Because it's just a clear screen. Now you have overlays to where they have little descriptions up and onto the actual box, and then have that ticker that goes underneath where gives you scores, gives you where to find me up and on social medias and everything else. So there was a bit of that where I had to really kind of master, because there's no really perfect way of doing it. It was
Yeah.
solely of learn the program, play with the program, and master the program to where it actually fits for you, and then it's less time consuming. The only thing that was difficult was clips. because it's like you have to download the actual various amount of data to
Yep.
then go in, find your best clip, get the captions in and all the rest of it. And luckily, I do have a really good team that has done a great job with posting up a lot of the really good clips that are only about 30 seconds or less, to where it actually gets to the point of a lot of stories. And now I got so many likes, so many follows, so many subscriptions, and then people want to join in now on the conversations in the next show.
Good. All right. Technology. I got you.
Mhm.
So now, again, you have athletes on your show, and you kind of mentioned in terms of like some of the guys that you met. LeVan Jefferson was one of them, but covering athletes, discussion points, like how do you interview? How do you prepare these interviews? How to develop a kind of the relationship? Because obviously, there's also a little bit of building trust when you have somebody come on, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
go through that as well in terms of like, hey, you're not going to misuse the content or whatnot. So how do you prepare for that stuff?
So I always try to look up, the player's history, where they played at, how long
Yep.
they've played at. The other
Yep.
thing is, does it also align into current sports topics that are happening right
Hmm.
now? And so that's where I start with that, because at the end of the day, they have experience with the organization. They may know some things that I didn't even know about in the organization that makes a lot of sense. So I
Yes.
try to start with that and then give their sole breakdown of their currency of the game. Like, are they seeing these players? How are they evaluating them based upon their experience level of the game? Then kind of go down a journey road of the memory road for some, like watching them play, the crucial plays. And then not to mention, even like the Super Bowl champion teams, how fun was that? To play with a strong group that was great in the locker room,
Yep.
and then what it means to be a champion, right? And then even getting into like, what are you currently doing now? Like, are you doing something that's more like, impactful in your life or even in your community that you live in? And so they shout out their foundations, they shout out their different programs, and so much more to really kind of keep them up and around the game. So I've had such great pleasures of even like the interviews that I never thought I'd get, right? But then somehow, some way, I got blessed with it because
Yeah.
one, Christian Okoye, the Nigerian nightmare. The fact that like I come in and get this guy talking about the currency of the Chiefs, and then he then goes and explains every year during Christmas time where he takes the kids out and goes on a $300 or more shopping spree because it was all about giving back to the community. And as somebody who lived in Nigeria, we talked even about the country and in soccer, because usually there in Africa, it's a big
Yeah.
deal for them. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how do you align with where soccer's been the more predominant sport internationally and what the NFL's doing to impact this by traveling around the world and then the international pool growing bigger? And he explained about, I have so many guys in Nigeria that text me all the time of like, Christian, I'm trying to get into the league. What do I need to do? What do I got to prepare myself? Even though I love my country and I love the game of soccer itself, but the NFL's drew me a lot to, I want to be an impactful, offensive lineman. Like we watched Jordan Mailata. We
Yeah.
watched a lot of these guys that played in rugby. So I was just really impressed with the interview itself because he's such a down to earth guy, very giving, and also someone that, can give you that great story of like, remembering his good old times where he used to give a lot of opposing defenses havoc because of just him running the ball, but then also giving back to his homeland country and then the players that he's grooming up to getting them into the league, is another thing that's also, I love stories like that
Yeah.
because at least I know that they're giving back in that sense. And you're not just solely looking at them as just a player of what they were in the time.
No, that's the interesting part in terms of when you talk to these fellows and ladies, in terms of like, again, they're regular people as well, right? Because you see
Yep.
them on the field, you see them on the ice and all that stuff. But there's actual, like, there's families, there's background and all that stuff. So they're going through the same stuff like everybody else. But
Hmm.
so from an athlete branding perspective, what do you feel like, again, we were kind of discussing how, media is different than it probably traditionally was. What do you
Yeah.
feel like, what separates like athletes that become, stars off the field? Because often enough, and I brought this up before, it's not the person that produces the most on the court isn't necessarily maybe the one that's the most known from a social media perspective. What do you
Right.
see the separation?
I think, when you've invested a lot of your time, in the league and you've put together like, whether you've played in 5, 10 plus years in the league or even less than that, whether it's been by due to injury or due to by performances and opportunities of contracts, right? a lot of these guys, like even what I grew up upon, I was so happy that I grew up upon where I've learned a lot of just the financial aspect of things,
Yeah.
investments,
Yeah.
savings, retirements and such. And,
Mhm.
I have my mother who, she showed me exactly the ways of how to do that since she deals with contracts every single day from a county level. And so a lot of these athletes, from far and wide, some of those athletes, they've learned them in the past, depending on, their family's history of somebody who's really tapped into financials, or they were more self-made and self-taught. And some that may not have actually tapped into that pool. And you see there's even stories of athletes that have been struggling to really kind of keep, their investments together. And yet
Yeah.
they're former athletes. How does this happen? I did talk with one guy, Michael, Michael White, who used to be a Green Bay Packer offensive lineman. Now he actually has a financial investment firm, and he also has a book of himself where this is my life in the game and what I do now off the field and
Gotcha.
building more of your financial youth wealth, because his story taps more into, his background to where he grew up in, and a lot of just the athletes that he come across that were not financially stable. And he said, I want to do something about that.
Yeah.
That's where his tenure in college and in school learned a lot more of the financial investment sides, where you start tapping into, how do I turn myself from barely making it paycheck to paycheck and now making it to where all of my money now is all in a set system to where it's going to where it's supposed to. You now have it where you got, your bills are automatically paid. You got a point where you've got more money saved up to where do you put it into an investment fund, watch it grow. It's like plants, right? You kind of have to plant the seed, water it, let it grow and prosper, and to the point where now your investments have tripled the growth over the years. And then at the same time, what you're doing to constantly revolve that to where you stay stable in that. And that's where a lot of athletes, it's hard for them because for some,
Yeah.
they either have suffered, like even the stories about CTE. Sometimes, their brain capacities are not what they once were before they ended up getting hit with contact. And now it's like we're trying to figure out, how do we navigate and how do we better progress without feeling like he's constantly failing and falling in this because of something that he doesn't have anymore like he once did. So I love a lot of the athlete outreaches like that, to where they go in, they find either current or former athletes and say, here's a really good financial investment plan that we want to put
Yeah.
for you here. And even for some, they have brand sponsorships. Like we watched Tom Brady, right? Tom
Yeah.
Brady's made a heck of a career of himself. But the thing was, Tom didn't just stop there.
No
Tom took
bull
advantage of a
talking.
lot
Yeah.
of, yeah,
Yeah.
he took a
Mhm.
lot of the time to work on TB12. He took a lot of the time to work on different brands because he realized, I'm taking pay cuts to get a better offensive line, but I'm also working on my personal branding
Yeah.
because one, I want to be stable when I'm off the field. And that's where TB12 workout programs, nutritionals, and
Uh,
all of that, he started perfecting that the minute that, like, while he was up and in the league, and to where he is now, to where he's covering the games. And now he's living the best lavish lifestyle because he took the advantage of the timing that he did to work on that, so that he is now living a more stable type of financial life now, where it's
yeah.
more, yeah.
Can totally relate. I mean, again, my core business is I have my own boutique wealth firm. So, I work with
Mhm.
athletes. Some of them retired, some of them obviously new up and coming. But I think, a lot of that stuff from a financial literacy perspective is extremely important. People just don't know, right? They're not aware.
Mhm.
Hey, you're getting a paycheck, be that on the NIL side for sponsorship, advertisement,
Yep.
or even as a pro, there's
Mhm.
taxes to be owned. You know what I mean? Like that doesn't, go away. So, yeah, from that perspective, that's certainly important. So on
Mhm.
that end, then kind of like, how important do you think networking is when you talk to these athletes, for athletes, in terms of while they're still playing? Because that's my argument that I make constantly. It's like, you're not planning for retirement when you're
Mhm.
retired. It's the
Right.
same thing for them. But I mean, again, when we talk about retirement for them, they're in the midst of, they're the what, early mid 30s? They
Mhm.
have another 30 years in the work life. So in terms of how important do you feel like, and how good are people at networking during the time, again, when they're still playing? Are they going to go into coaching, broadcasting, whatever? What's your take there?
I think it is important because to me, I feel like, everybody has an opportunity to really make an impact somewhere. Even if it felt like, growing up you didn't exactly go like this route of life. You took
Right.
an alternative route, right? So, I mean, I've had a guy that, does mini camps mostly for corners and
Yeah.
safeties. And he
Okay.
does a lot of like the skill and technique breakdown from a lot of different films and a lot of different studies. And so, like, even if he played a short amount of career in his NFL career, he still made an impact of it because it was preparing for the next youth ahead. And so I think networking and still kind of keeping those tides close with the league you played in, the guys you had the pleasure of playing around with really is important because it may lead to, the next step in life to where, I've put my all up and onto the field. I've had great relationships with guys I played with, and even for some that navigated me to this opportunity, whether it be financial or maybe it be
Yeah.
scouting or coaching or, something else too that also, impacts their life. So I think it's great because at the same time, it's a big sports community at the end of the day. Everybody's all played the same game. Everybody
Right.
has all had different aspects of the game in which this is how it should be played or this is how it's evolving for it to get the gameplay to be better. And then at the same time is you're learning about, these guys' lifestyles, like what they're really succeeding in one area or some that they may be struggling and they're looking for a new alternative. And so like I think that is always the best. It's even the same when it comes to like, our podcasting community, because it's like, how do I really grow further? As far as in the industry itself, or even just, preparing financially
Yeah.
wise for me to set my money aside to where I know this is where it's going to be and grow. And to where as I'm growing up and into the tiers along with the industry, that's where I've saved enough of that money itself to then now branch it and build it further as I start growing up and into the tiers. So I think it's the most essential element. It
Yeah.
works out great because you never know who you cross paths with. And then you have a chopping up conversation. That's a great conversation where it's like, I like this person's
Yeah.
personality. I think he's got a shot at this.
Yeah, people work with people they like, right? In every aspect of life, kind
Mhm.
of, so,
Yeah.
obviously personality, that's good stuff. Now, as we're heading kind of towards the end, let's talk, a little bit in terms of like, talk in sports talk more so in terms of like baseball, college football coming up, NFL. Let's go real quick here. So baseball, middle of the season, what do people have to look out for? What are the hot takes for the rest of the season as far as you're concerned, baseball wise?
Well, we know it's a great weekend, right? Because we got the All-Star game in Philadelphia for celebrating 250 years of our nation. And, no better way than just the original colony of 1776. So I love it very much.
Yeah.
I do expect, we got the home run derby. I mean, Kyle
Yep.
Schwarber's competing, Bryce Harper, and even with Junior Caminero, who's been on fire. I do
What do you think about
expect,
Ben Rice's chance in terms of like, making some noise?
I think Ben Rice, this is a fun opportunity for him.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's kind of hard in a sense because I've watched his swing path and just like his swing trajectory itself. I don't know if that really truthfully aligns from a home run derby standpoint, but
Yeah.
he does contribute in a lot of like the in-game stuff. So I think
Yeah.
Ben Rice is going to have a fun showing for itself. I'm curious
Cool.
to see it because I watch how he sets himself up. It's kind of more of like that longer swing and then
Pull it.
he sells it. Yeah. So I think he'll have a pretty good showing. I mean, at the end of the day, he's an all-star. Now, the Yankees, I mean, my big thing is they've got to find consistency. They got to find a battery for their
Yes.
lineup to get going because this has not been, the best last couple of series games that they played
No.
in where the offense is just not clicking for them. So
No.
injuries has been a problem for them, but at the same time, it's where you're putting these guys in this lineup that's more important, where they need to spark a battery up from there. So, and again, I have my personal thoughts about Aaron Boone. I really felt like New York should have let go of him 3 years ago, only
Gotcha.
because of that. But, to me, we're past the days of strong managers. A lot of this is all built upon, the front offices
Metrics,
with their
right?
lineups. Exactly. So the Rays have been red hot. Junior
Yeah.
Caminero since kind of mid-June, he's been launching, I think, like 17, 18 home runs in that stretch, and he's just been finding the ball. It looks like a beach ball to him. So he's been raking in the runs, getting the home runs. But there's going to be several different surprises. I'm not sure in the Central, though, because the Brewers, the Reds, there's a lot of question marks. but I do think there's going to be some pretty good trades. I think this is better than the trade deadline that we got last year because there are more contracts opening up, but you also are seeing a lot of teams that are just trapped in contracts that they wish they never even been in the first place, like i.e. the
Yeah.
Mets with Juan Soto, and now like you let Pete Alonso go, and now it's just a disaster. So
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of different surprises. I do think the small market teams have been competing more with these bigger market teams.
I mean, Brewers look good too, right? So
Yeah, the Brewers have been looking good. I also say, like, even the team that's awaiting to be at their home in Las Vegas, the A's have been, really good for their farm system. And so I think it all just comes down to the stretch of who gets there faster. But the other thing is with the new ABS system, I can't wait till we get to the postseason when we have this implemented, because I think that changes a lot of what you and I were so used to watching in the postseason, where crucial calls, crucial spots, like either that's a 3 strikeout type play, or, an opportunity where a batter keeps themselves alive in the at bat, because then they can find a way to score or get on base. So I'm excited for that one as well.
well, that's a good point. And in terms of favorite, you would still go with the Dodgers?
I think, all signs really do point to the Dodgers, but I mean, it comes down to as well, like, I mean, don't sleep on the Braves. I think they've been at this point now, but I know Ronald Acuna being hurt, but guys like Austin Riley and the rest of them, they have to get going if they really want to show for it in the National League. The Phillies, since they fired Rob Thompson, they've looked completely different with Don Mattingly. I've loved with what they've done. They found a spark, and even this I feel like is the Phillies' last chance to really do it because of the guys that you have there: Schwarber, Harper, Trey Turner. Like you got to get something going with this team, and I feel like they have found a spark from there. So it's quite possible that they do.
Any takes on college football? Obviously, that's around the corner as well.
Well, I mean, we have the resurrection of the Pac-12 right now, and Boise State. I absolutely love the Broncos. I think this is an exciting moment to seeing the Pac-12 be revived again, but in a different realm. But I do think there's going to be a lot of different outlooks as far as what does Ohio State look like after they've lost a lot of their key defensive players? How does Alabama really, set their offensive tone now with Keelan Russell potentially being the quarterback of this team? And is Arch Manning the real deal? Because to me, I'm looking
Texas
at
fan,
it.
so I hope he is. So
Yeah, and so because I think a lot of it is on the line for Sark in the SEC, because you've had a really good wide receiving core. You got better with it, but where did you leave off from last year in the last couple of games to where Arch is building? I think he has the potential, but quarterbacks that I've watched thus far, Dante Moore's coming back for Oregon. Is this Oregon and Dan Lanning's shot to really make noise? Because, they've lost players, but not a whole lot to where they can't compete. They can definitely compete into the national championship. And a team I really have not been sleeping on has been the Oklahoma Sooners. I love John Mateer. I watched his video in camp, the throw trajectory. I think he is bound for an impactful season. And I've said it before, I would not be surprised if John Mateer makes a case to being the top 5 pick in the draft, because that guy's he's got mobility. His throw trajectory has gotten better. It's more accurate, and he's stretching down the field on a lot of the deep ball shots. I think Mateer can be the real thing, because I think it's just the hand was really lingering from last year, but I think he's going to be 10 times better from it. Watch out for Oklahoma. I think Brent Venables really put this thing together well.
Last take, NFL, teams to watch.
Well, I think this is a open platform now for the NFL. I mean, we got a lot of teams that have stacked up, really look good. Speaking of the Jets, I mean, I love their draft picks. I do think Omar Cooper is a question mark in my opinion, but I think David Bailey, you put him together with a really good edge rushing group with the front 7, he'll definitely produce up. The Kenyon Sadiq one, I think that's going to be interesting with a dual tight end set. I think between him and Mason Taylor, I love both of them. So the Geno Smith thing, we'll see. I mean, there's still a lot of the investigation going on, but at the same time, we've been saying this about the Jets. They're just a quarterback away. I love the foundation they put together. All it takes is just that. And 65% of the league all whiff on their franchise quarterbacks.
I mean, Geno, if you think about it, Geno Smith that we have now is not the same Geno Smith that once upon a time played for the Jets.
Very true.
Very true. Season together for the Seahawks, I would make the argument. I have a lot of friends that are Raider fans, but there wasn't a whole lot of protection for him last year. So, and actually, the one bright side in the Jets last year was the consistency with their offensive line. So,
Yeah, and I think the other thing is too is can he tone down the reckless throws? That was another
yes,
thing that
yes,
also was a big problem. Yeah, there was pressure in his face, but can
but
he be able to tune it out and actually more adjustment to where he's getting the accurate dump offs and even the midfield passes? I think there's some good to be made there with the Jets. The Chargers, my big thing is this the team that they finally formed up that can make a run at this? Because
yep.
Herbert, with the no playoff win narrative on his shoulders, is pressurizing enough. This is where he has to step up as a leader and take charge in that. Jim Harbaugh, this is his third year being with the Chargers, and everybody's looking at it as, well, what about the build that he had in San Francisco? Is he honestly going to get there to the AFC Championship? Because if not, this kind of feels like it could be a failure for Jim Harbaugh himself. I mean, you're in 3 years, and
Yep.
what you spent in San Francisco, you turn that team around. So I love the Mike McDaniel hire. I do think it's a lot of youth here in this group, but I do think they have the makings to make this team a really dark horse, well-run team to really make it into the AFC Championship because Burrow coming back healthy, he's pissed and determined. He wants to get the Bengals back into the playoffs. And the Chiefs, they went into a down year. Do they end up, picking themselves back up? So we have a lot of narratives,
Oh,
and it's
there's a
I
lot of
think it's
varieties. It's a lot of fun. Yeah.
Oh,
It's
yeah, and I mean, yeah, did the Rams are the Rams really the higher Super Bowl favorites after getting Myles Garrett? We won't know until they end up hitting the field, so there's a lot of that speculation, but I think this is gonna be a fantastic and wild year this year than what we've had in the last 2 seasons.
I mean, the other fellow on the other end, Byron, right, with the
Yep.
Rams. It's not That's guy's no slouch either. So they have really
No.
they have a great line.
Yep, a great
But
line and a lot of the young youth that they've got, and even with Trent McDuffie that they picked up. I mean,
yeah,
this is the
lineman.
definition of going all in. So, yeah, I mean,
All right.
is this become the story where Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford ride into the sunset after this? Who knows?
Oh, they're both young. I mean, isn't McVay younger than actual Stafford? I
Yeah,
think he is.
he's
Yeah.
younger than Stafford, and Stafford is just pushing 40, man, and it's just like,
That's
man,
good for him. Yeah, good for him.
yeah.
But hey, Jake, I appreciate all the insight. Again, obviously, what it takes to put together a talk show like yours. Congrats, and then also a little bit of the insight in terms of working with athletes, and obviously your take on the upcoming season here or the end of the
Mm.
baseball season. So, thank you very much for being on.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.